What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Arrive and Drive. I just ran into a brick wall. I don't know what else to say. Let's try this again. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Arrive and Drive. I'm Zach. That's Jordan. And we got a short staff this week. Nate hurt himself. I don't know if we talked about this last week, but Nate...
We did. We mentioned it.
Blew out his knee. Yeah.
We mentioned
he had
that
surgery
he rolled
today.
Yeah. I think he rolled his leg last time, but he blew out his knee now, I guess we have. So, yeah, I guess had to go for, like you said, went for surgery.
Yep. So he's doing better. That's good. He had like a 3-hour surgery today. So think about you, Nate. Can't wait to have you back on the show.
Absolutely.
Eastham is actually at a pickleball tournament. So that's pretty dang cool. Weird flex.
Yeah,
and
right.
Then our man Jed Perkins actually won the championship at Florida Winter Tour in 206. So congrats, Jed. Can't wait to have him back on the show again. So
he is probably out celebrating instead of being with us. So
for sure, I don't blame him either. I don't blame him. I think he won a ride to drive in Vegas.
Oh,
so
really?
That's pretty cool. Yeah, KA 100, I believe.
And speaking of Arrive and Drive, we are back in the Riverside Arrive and Drive studios here to do this podcast. But also, we're going to give a shout out to our friend Bobby Krug, who, as we all know, has worked for Skip Barber. They are actually hosting an iRacing event where you can go sign up for. They have their own iRacing event that they're doing. I think it's, 3 weeks? 3 weeks of worth of racing that they're doing. Anyway, it's like the last chance to sign up for week 1.
6 weeks. There's 6
races. 6 weeks it might have been. Anyway,
yeah, there are 6 races.
Yeah, so 6 races. But anyway, this is almost coming to the end of week 1 to sign up, and this is going to be your chance to get a chance to drive in a Skip Barber F4 car. So for any of you guys or kids going out of karting or looking to get into an F4 car, this could be your one and only chance.
This isn't a paid advertisement, but it could be. Wink, wink.
Yes.
All right, so let's jump into something that I love to do every week. It's actually a great humility segment. Dumb things to do on the racetrack. Now, Jordan Missing, we have not gotten into one of your own experiences of dumb things to do on the racetrack. Oh, it's me this week? I always use my example of crashing into a cornfield when we have guests, but you know the drill. What you got on your mind? Dumb things to do on the racetrack. What's the dumbest thing that you've done on the racetrack?
It's certainly not as dumb as crashing into a cornfield. I'll give you that one. But
hey, now
I'm not going to say it reaches that far, but it was pretty dumb on my part. Let's just say, all right. So I was out. This was back in 2017, I think. 17. Second year of karting, and actually no, this was 19. This was 19. So after I was done winning the Margay Night Challenge Senior Championship, and I moved on to racing radicals, I started doing some coaching out here at the Audubon, the Kart Circuit Audubon racetrack for the kart circuits. Anyway, started doing some coaching with some people, and I had this one client who I was always good buddies with on the racetrack. Well, his girlfriend was starting to get into karts. So I was out at the kart track, and she wanted to go do some laps and wanted to get faster. So I was going to give her a little bit of a lesson, or just at least ride behind her, see her line, get in front of her, have her follow me. Well, at the time, she was... Yeah, lead follow. So at the time, she was still kind of warming up to pace and speed. So as I was in front, I was trying to kind of push a little bit, but also pull it back a little bit so that way I didn't pull too far away from her. Anyway, going through for those of you at our kart circuit, there's a fast left-hander that goes into the right-hander, which is known as the skid pad section. And it's like a little left-right quick chicane. It's basically flat out, you take it. Well, at the time, they had barriers on the right-hand side to where if you ramped over the curves, you basically hit the barriers. So me, unbeknownst, was just kind of running along, looking back to see if she was there and behind me and kind of slowing up. Well, I looked back behind me to see where she was, and when I turned around, I ran right into the barrier with my right rear axle and broke the axle in the cart. So I was going to race the next day in the kart race, and I ended up breaking the axle practicing during the practice sessions while I was trying to teach someone how to drive the go-karts.
So you lost an axle. I'm guessing you probably lost the axle bearings too, right? What all did you
Let's just
lose in that?
no. The axle was just bent, so everything was
That's
good. It's
it?
just the axle was bent. Yeah, it just had a
Really?
bent axle, so I couldn't use the axle,
So
obviously.
you could have
And
used that for bent axles and broken hearts too.
there you go.
If we would have been doing this show in 2019.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But so I had a bent axle, but luckily enough, I had a spare cart at the time. So I just grabbed the other axle off of that cart, but it still was an axle that could have been prevented and not been used. But it was just not looking, paying attention to where I was going. And by the time I looked around, boom, I hit a barrier, and I wasn't even
Jeez.
trying. So
I don't think. See, I've done a lot of dumb things in my life. I don't think I've even done something like that. But we actually, it's funny. I don't know if we should save this for another time, but we have our own um, dumb experience that we experienced together. Actually, uh,
I might have to refresh my memory on this one.
Indianapolis 2017.
Oh, I know where you're going with this one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. I know
So
where
I
you're going
think
with
was
this.
this your first? This was your first year in Ignite, right? Or is it your second?
17 was my first year doing any travel race. So Indianapolis was my first travel race ever.
Okay. That was my first Ignite race ever. Like really bad first, like, because that was my first race on asphalt. I'd done dirt for, 14, 15, 16. So 3 years, 17 partial, fourth year. But I
So
learned
folks,
about
you can
Ignite.
see where this is going now. Zach's
Yeah.
first race, my first travel race. We know where
Mhm.
this is going.
Completely inexperienced. Like, truthfully, I had no business being there, but they had this, great arrive and drive program with Margay to give you the opportunity to go race at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And whether you're a racer or not, like, you have that experience, that opportunity to go do that, you're going to take it every time. I mean, there's people
Absolutely.
that raced and that came out of retirement, that they were older and they came out of retirement to race that. There were people that raced other things like me that came to race that. There were people that literally never had raced anything before and had never driven anything aside from their daily drive that
Mhm.
came to run that. And it was just because it was Indy.
Yeah.
It was just one of those events. And so, guess to kind of give a little preview of how this went. My first few sessions on the track were very rough. I spun a few times, not knowing the brakes, because like for reference, I guess like we ran our brakes in our dirt carts really soft, like really, because you don't brake at all in those things, and even if you do, it's very little, so you don't need strong brakes. Like I mean, my brakes were about as soft as you could be. And there was actually one time I lost brakes, and so that's another story. But so getting used to the brakes, obviously rear brake only, so it's really easy to spin out if you've never driven anything like that before. And so I had issues with that, and then so we're coming up. Let's fast forward the pre-final that weekend. I think it was the pre-final. It was either the heat race or the pre-final. But there was a race that it was not the final. It was on a Saturday.
This would have been the
And
pre-final then, I think. Yeah.
yes, it was the pre-final.
Yes. Yeah, it was
Because
pre-final.
Hunter Richardson was on the front row, or he was like top 4 or something. Like
This was the race he flipped, right?
Yes.
So
Okay.
it was pre-final. Yep.
Because what kind of transpires here will totally make sense why we were in this situation. So Hunter gets flipped over. I forget who spun him or flipped him, but basically somebody on the front row flips. You got 45 carts scattering everywhere. And like this is the first real corner. It was technically turn 2, but it was the first real corner you had to like brake or anything. And cars are straight lining the grass, people going everywhere. We were like 6 wide. I just lit it up and went through the grass, and I went from like 40th to 14th in just that little section. And so we're coming around, and like I realized like, oh, I'm in this like main pack now. I'm like, I didn't know what to do because I didn't practice with people. When I was on the track, I was pretty much either by myself or I was with a few other people. But like we weren't. I mean, we were at the back. You know what I mean? Like you're just still learning
Right.
the cart. You're not
Yeah.
really even in a position to learn the track yet. You're just kind of you're just out there. And I somehow got intermixed with you because you had avoided the wreck also,
Well,
so we were around each other.
Yeah, because everybody in the front got bottled up because of what
Yeah.
happened to Hunter. Because
Yep.
he's sitting in the middle of the road. Everyone's going to do everything they can to divert him. And Zach,
Exactly.
fortunately enough for you, the way Indianapolis was just grass on the outside part of the track, so you could just keep it pinned, go to the outside of everybody, and just try to railroad the track and merge in with everybody else.
Well, not to mention, being the first lap, tires are not coming in. We're talking about the Bridgestone YDS tires, which
Yeah,
take a while to come in. So everybody's sliding around. That really broke the rhythm, not only of the race, but the weekend, that incident, because I feel like for the most part, you had incidents every session, but it wasn't like major. And this really it kind of changed the rhythm to where guys were like really careful after this. I think it was really off after that. But so I was able to keep up with the guys around me, and we're fast forward. I think it was either the end of the first lap or the end of the second lap, and we're coming up. It was the end of the back straightaway, and so you're coming out of a right hand sweeper, 90 degrees. You track out to the left. Next corner is a left-hander. That's kind of a long-ish straightaway. So you come back over to the right setup. I come back over to set up for the left-hander, and I may or may not have hit a certain part driven by a certain driver, and may or may not have pitted him into the crossover barrier.
Yep.
And may or may not have sent him flying over somebody's head. And he may or may not have been able to drive away from it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I totally shipped Jordan. And it was one of those things where it was so late in the straightaway, like I did a head check just to make sure, and I probably shouldn't have. But because, when you do a head check like that, guys think, okay, he sees me, so I'm going to go for it. Which I don't know if that was what you're thinking at the time. But, I moved over thinking, okay, nobody's going to make a move on the outside this late. So I moved, and you were there, and I just, I completely mistimed it, and I shoved you in the grass. But, that was right. It was horrible timing. It was right at the crossover gate.
Well,
so, what's your rendition of that? Because that was, kind of sketchy. I thought I killed somebody.
So I don't know I can't remember if you were getting pushed if you were in a draft with someone or if you were kind of at a point where you were by yourself. But I know I was getting a shot from behind and I had a huge run on you. And I saw where you were positioned on the track. And I thought, there's room to the right-hand side. I can at least get to the outside and have enough momentum going into the corner where I can either go side by side with you or I can maybe clear you before the corner. And by the time I already committed is the time you started to move up. And at that point, I can't back out. And especially if I had someone behind me pushing, it's going to end it for both of us.
For sure. Yeah, if you back out, you're on the straightaway still getting pushed. I mean, it's hard to get grip with those tires anyways. You probably would have got spun out.
Oh, yeah.
And, so for I guess to add more context, I was pushing a guy in front of me. So my position on the racetrack was I was just following him. And you guys had a run. So obviously you're going to go where we're not. So in a track like that where you're drafting quite a bit, it's good to find guys to work with. And you got to take moves as you can because if, it's really easy to get lost in the shuffle on a track like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that was another bent axle, right?
Yeah, that was another bent axle.
Was that it? Was that it?
That was it, yeah. That was the only bent axle. And that was a straight up 90-degree bent axle.
But
that was
didn't
straight
you drive
up
it away,
degrees.
Though? You drove it away, didn't you?
No. I drove it to the next corner, basically into the gravel trap area off the racetrack, and then I just got out of it because there was no way I was going to be able to make it back. I mean, as soon as I hit the barrier, I knew something was up. You can immediately feel it if you have a broken axle. So I just kind of pulled it off, didn't want to damage the cart anymore, got out of it, pulled the cart off to the side, and then sat out the side of the road flipping Zach off every time he came past me.
You didn't even know that was me.
No, I didn't. I didn't even know who it was.
It was like last year I brought it up, and I was like, yeah, I remember Indy. That was pretty wild, and we were just talking about our experiences with Indy. And then I was like, yeah, there's this red cart that I shoved in the grass, but I could never figure out who it was. And I was going through my mind trying to remember who was in a red cart that weekend. And you're like, oh, I was in a red cart. I was like, you're not 24. I remember there being a 2 on this cart because I was thinking it was either like 24, 26, 28, something like that.
Well, 26 was Vansel.
Vansel, but I was like, I don't think it was Vansel because Vansel finished that race.
Yeah.
But I was like, man. And then it clicked. I was like, hey, did you get wrecked in one of the preliminaries? And you're like, yeah,
Yep.
I got sent in the air. I was like, that might have been me. So
Yeah. But I had to
that's
start last that
crazy.
race. So thanks to you.
And well, see, it's funny. It's very fitting, very karma of me that the next lap crashed out, like just went off track, and yeah, threw away my race. So I went from 40th to 14th and back to like 43rd or something. So it
Yeah.
was great. That
That,
first weekend, and of course you pick a race like that to make it your first.
yeah.
So
That race, we could go on and on about Indianapolis and how
it was
crazy of a
so
race
fun,
that
dude.
is.
Like as
But I
crazy
mean,
as it was, like, and we were both really inexperienced to be there ourselves, but it was
absolutely.
really like it was a great learning experience because it's
I will.
you learn about drafting, you learn about uh, kart control, you learn about race management,
Absolutely.
and learning when to take a move and when to not take a move and when to push somebody, when not to push somebody. Yeah, you really learned a lot from that.
After racing Indianapolis, I will say my evolution in karting grew substantially. I
Yeah,
think gained a ton of experience out of it. I mean, every track I'd go to, I try to start drafting people, try to start pushing people because that's what you did at Indianapolis when you went there, and that was the fast way around. So
for sure.
I think for me, that actually told me what karting was about because racing here at some of these Midwestern tracks, you tend to get a little spread out and start driving on your own. Whereas, racing in Indianapolis, it teaches you to draft, to push people, and how to work together. So where you can go up and try to go catch other people who may have not have a drafting partner, or B, are just a little bit slower working as a group. And if you're working together as a good tandem, you could be the fastest.
So kind of recircling back on, the venue, obviously being at Indy, you learned a lot. One thing, and this is something I certainly regret, and it's especially that now that we don't race at Indy anymore, um, is that I would always get caught up in. I mean, certainly to a fault, I would always get caught up in the venue. You're racing
Yeah,
at Indy. I would never. I would be more caught up in where we were racing than the race itself, if that makes sense. You're
yeah,
there to do a job. You're there to do your thing. I think by like 2020, the last year we did it, I was like finally in that mode where I was like, all right, we're here for sure. Like we're here for real.
yep,
And it, you know, it's one of the Indy has a way of, I mean, just from racing karts there, it certainly has a way of humbling you. You think you learn something and you think, okay, yeah, we got a legitimate shot. And then it kind of brings you back down to earth. And then you're like, oh, well, we're just another person racing here. Because
absolutely.
I qualified fourth the last year we ran there. And I was like, hey, this is awesome. You know, we did 3 wide starts for the first heat. And I was like, hey, we're starting row 2 inside. We're pushing Stommer at a race like this. It's like, okay, like I'll take that. And then first lap wreck, huge wreck. It was like, a bunch of karts. But yeah, it was cool because you kind of got that experience of racing in a big venue like that. I'm sure it helped a lot of guys like you. When you go on to race bigger and better things, the venue does not phase you at that point, I would think. So
Absolutely no. I mean, from a novice person, when you're racing at Indy, like myself, when I first went there, I was so. I mean, I will for one say I was probably not thinking about where I was racing at until I want to say the last couple laps of that first race
yeah,
in 2017 when I was just by myself, and I was like, I'm actually racing at Indianapolis. But before then, it was just like another kart race, and it was kind of just like you want to win and you want to be competitive. So
for sure.
until like you are by yourself or you realize you're coming to the end of it and you get a chance to take it all in and see where you actually are running, that's the moment where you realize you're racing at such a amazing venue as Indianapolis is. And I'm sure, later this year I'll be racing the GP circuit. So I'm sure when I go there the whole entire time, I'm going to be thinking we're just at another racetrack until it's that
Right.
final lap. And then I'm like, holy shit, I'm racing in Indianapolis.
So I was never like when it came to being on track, I was never really caught up in the moment. Like like except for the parade lap. You know what I mean? Like you do the
That
parade
that was
lap
the one
on
time where you could get in
Sunday
the moment and understand
for
and just
sure.
take it all in and be like, hey, this is where we're at. This is cool.
Yeah, like the parade lap on Sunday where you got the vintage, I think is a 1969 Camaro pace car from the like a legitimate pace car from the Indy 500 that year, and it's taking you around and you do your parade lap and you've got all these people sitting there watching you, and like, yeah, you definitely take it in there, but you come around, you see the pace car pull off. You're not thinking about it at that point. You're
Yeah.
okay, tires are warmed up. All right, let's go. Let's make sure we get a push. You're watching, whoever's front row. You're trying to look ahead to see, who's where, and then you're timing the start, and then you're going. Like I never got caught up in, like when we were on track. I never got caught up in the venue, but certainly like between, it was really easy to get caught up in it. Like between sessions and everything, just because it's not every day that you just pull up to a track like that and race.
You just know when you walk out of like a tent or anything, or your area where you were working, your pit area, and you walk down and you could just see the pagoda in the distance. That's when you realize where you were at Indianapolis. And you just really, when you're underneath the tent or anywhere else, you didn't really think you were anywhere like at a track like Indianapolis until you saw that pagoda. Once you saw
For
it,
sure.
it brought you back to you're here at Indianapolis.
Yeah, and especially now looking back on it, it's like I don't think I personally. Maybe you can elaborate on this, Jordan. I personally don't feel like I appreciate it enough. I mean, as cool as I thought it
Yeah,
was, I mean now we can't do it. We can't go there and race
yeah.
carts at the battle at the Brickyard anymore. So I have a greater appreciation for that race even more now because you can't go back and experience that. So thinking about that now, it's like, man, like we were really privileged to get the race there. There are kids that will look back on this 10, 20, 30 years from now if they don't bring that race back ever. And they'll look back and be like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Either that, or for some people who just knew the race was going on, wanted to be there, but just never were able to pull the trigger to go there.
Oh,
They
yeah,
just certainly missed an opportunity. And
for sure.
unless you were there, like, you had to go at least one time to experience it. And out of those 4 years, you had to at least try it once. And if you weren't unfortunately enough to go any of those 4 years, you guys missed out, and absolutely missed out big time, because that was definitely a race you had to go do.
Definitely. So we were talking about, Ben Axles and everything. Let's jump into Ben Axles and Broken Hearts. So unfortunately, if you guys didn't know this, last week there was a horrible accident involving a David Gilliland Racing hauler in which the driver Steven Stotts passed away. So obviously, the team was racing under heavy hearts Friday night for the ARCA Menards West race at Phoenix, and as crazy as it sounds, Taylor Gray, driver of the DGR 17 car that was, involved in that transporter accident, they went to victory lane the same week that happened. Not even, I think it was like not even 3
It was
days
a couple
later.
days. Well,
Yeah.
the hauler was on its way to Phoenix. The crash
Yep.
happened in Texas.
Yep. It
So,
was it was like Tuesday or Wednesday that this
yeah,
happened. I think it was Wednesday morning maybe. But there were I remember the team released a statement where they had yet to determine whether or not they're even racing that weekend
yeah.
because it was such a short turnaround, and they made it happen. And it's crazy to think about, not just motorsports but sports in general, the way that stuff happens. It's just it's pretty dang cool that they were able to do that.
It's awesome to see it happen, especially for Steven. They had got to get the win for Steven as well. But, at the same time, I got to give credit to the rest of the DGR team for, under the circumstances they were under, losing a teammate in those whole series of events, and to be able to pull themselves together, get a car ready. Because remember, I don't know if that trailer caught on fire or not, but it definitely looked like it did. Just by
Yeah,
the way the amount of damage was done to that trailer in the pictures. But just to get like the whole car together, to get another transporter together, and get all their stuff out to Phoenix for the race, and to go ahead and put a performance together and Taylor Gray to bring home a win for that team, definitely says a lot for what that team was capable of. And David Gilliland has done an amazing job hiring such fantastic people for that team, and kind-hearted people as well, to go out there, get a win, and do it for Steven Stotts, as he unfortunately put his life on the line for those guys to go racing that week.
for sure. Yeah, and it's crazy. I was thinking about that after the accident happened. It's like, man, like I think we kind of take for granted like these, like you said, these you don't think about it. These transporter drivers, they kind of lay
They're
their
li-
life on the line, because you don't think about this, but how many accidents you hear of every year, and I don't have a statistic in front of me, obviously, but talking about incidents involving transporters, semis, 18 wheelers,
yep,
especially fatalities. I feel like those people aren't appreciated enough. Transporter drivers,
yeah.
semi drivers, especially because we have such a lack of them right now. There's not, we definitely need a lot more of them in our country. There's just not, all these things that are being shipped on a day to day basis. There's not enough people to drive these trailers. But yeah, you really feel for him, and it's crazy to think about that. This could happen at any point to any team, to any person driving these haulers, and you know, it's pretty sad to think about.
And to add to your point, Zach, it's kind of crazy that we don't hear about these stories often or more accidents on the road, seeing how often they're traveling week in and week out. I mean, you think about it, how many transporters in the NASCAR paddock would you say are traveling to each and every race? You got 36 at least in each series. So right there, that's over 100 transporters, I would say, between all four series. And they're traveling 38 weekends out of the year. So, and over like going cross country, coast to coast, and whatnot. So to hear about it just proves that how one good the drivers are. I feel like in the haulers, but two, how demanding of a job it is that these guys have to go through just week in and week out just to put on a show for all of us fans on television at the racetrack.
And really, how professional they are.
Yep.
I hear about people rag on semi drivers all the time, and to think about that, these guys that drive these transporters for these NASCAR teams, and you can even extend this to IndyCar teams, to IMSA
IMSA
teams.
teams.
Yeah, these professional drivers, literally professionals, and you never hear of accidents. Very rarely do you hear of accidents involving transporters involved with racing, which is great for our industry that we have so many great CDL drivers. But yeah, it's certainly something to be thankful for, I think. And again, just reflecting on the entire situation, just kind of I think almost makes it even more sad. But
Yeah. But like we said, for Taylor Gray to come back and get a win in that weekend at Phoenix in the ARCA West Series definitely puts a cap. I think allows to bring the team a little bit of closure to it all.
I think
Seeing
so.
that they were able to
Yeah,
cap it off and like it really brought the team back up to a happy state, at least that they did it for him. And I think it kind of signifies the legacy that Steven Strauss brought to this team.
for sure. And I mean, you make a good point about closure. It makes you think of you know on a much larger scale, Dale Earnhardt. With
Yep.
Steve Park winning at Rockingham the next weekend. You think of Kevin Harvick winning Atlanta, and I believe his third start.
Yeah, third
Um,
start. And
yeah,
then Junior winning at Daytona.
Junior winning Daytona. Yeah, and it's just like that. And you see these events. I mean, I said this earlier. You see these instances in sports. You think of, for example, like when Brett Favre lost his father and
Yeah.
played. I don't know if it was that same night, but it was within the week that he lost his father and put up these insane stats, like ungodly stats
Right.
for an NFL quarterback that night. So it's it makes you wonder what is going through somebody's mind to determine them to be able to keep competing, especially when you look at NASCAR being this is an entire team that has
Yeah.
to cohesively work together and be on point for Taylor Gray to even have a chance to drive up there and win that race, and then for him to do it himself. Yeah, really says that NASCAR is a team sport, and it's pretty cool to see that team rally around each other.
Absolutely. So our thoughts and prayers here at Arrive and Drive go out to David Gillen Racing as a team, everybody, and the Steven Strauss, his friends and family. as our condolences go out to the rest of the Steven Strauss's friends, family, and everybody else that has been part of Strauss's life, I should say. All right, let's move on to the Wings of Things topic now, and this is going to be an interesting one because Team Strange Racing, it's a Chicago-based team, going to be bringing down Tarzo Marquez, who's going to be doing 8 races this year in the NASCAR Cup Series. Going to be doing all the road courses throughout the course of the year. So Road America, going to be also be doing the Charlotte Roval later in this year. And then he's going to be doing the last couple races of the year at Homestead and Phoenix, the championship race to close out the year. So, Zach?
It's pretty crazy to me. I never would have guessed in 2022 that I would be hearing Tarso Marquez's name and that it would be in NASCAR.
Associated with a NASCAR race.
So I remember, I had this almost creepy infatuation with kart, like the glory days of kart. And I still go back and watch kart races, but, like Champ Car, American Open Wheel Racing. I would go back and watch, I think I started in the year 1999. I'd watch all those races. And I watched every kart race from 1999 to 2006 or something. And I remember seeing Tarso Marquez's name. He drove for Dale Coyne. He drove for he did a couple one-off drives for Penske. And he also had an F1 career. He drove for Minardi. But he drove 6. Yeah, he drove the 3 car, 6 different races.
Yep.
I just dropped my water bottle. He drove the same car that Greg Moore was signed to drive.
That's right.
The next year. It was actually the same car that Gonzalo Rodriguez was killed in at Laguna Seca, and obviously the ride that we now know Elio Castroneves would take on. Actually, interesting to point out, Alex Barron also drove that car. So he drove for Penske in 2 different stints as a relief driver, and Barron would later win in the IRL. So that's kind of cool to think about. But yeah, Tarso Marquez, bringing this back full circle. It's cool to see another team just out of the blue enter NASCAR. We saw this with the money team, Floyd Mayweather. Yeah. However, that was years in the making. You look at, was it Heisenberg? That team, the 27 car that Villeneuve ran, Jacques Villeneuve, as Nate calls them. That team, that's cool. You see all these new teams. Trackhouse added on a car, 2311 added on a car. So it's really cool to see more and more interest in the Cup Series, especially with this car. And, Tarso Marquez being a proper road racer, it's pretty interesting to see that there's interest for him to come race NASCAR at such a late stage in his career. I mean, this guy is 46 years old. Yeah. This is like Jimmy Johnson going from, to a lesser extent, this is like Jimmy Johnson going from NASCAR to IndyCar. But, it's just kind of crazy.
I think we also see this a lot now, too, with some experienced guys. They come and do the road course races. I mean, You've seen Boris Said numerous times, comes in and does, don't get me wrong, Boris Said did used to race a lot of Cup Series races and also was a full-time NASCAR driver earlier in his career. But now that he's gotten to the later stages of his career, he was just only doing the road courses. I think Ron Fellows was another one who did just road course racing for NASCAR as well. AJ Allmendinger, that's how he kind of got into NASCAR, was just doing the road course stuff because he was racing Champ Car beforehand, started doing the road course racing, then became a full-time season driver. Last year, we saw Joey Hand. He raced for the Ford Performance in the Ford GT and then raced over in Porsche in IMSA. He raced for Rick Ware Racing last year. Jacques Villeneuve, we saw raced IndyCar for the 500, raced some F1. Then he came over to race the NASCAR series, except he just did it at Daytona, which was quite interesting for him to pick that race of all, but it's the 500, so understandably so. In this case of Taro Marquez, he's going to be doing all the road courses. So he's basically doing the Watkins Glen race. He's also going to be doing Road America. He's also going to be doing the Charlotte Roval, but he's also going to incorporate some oval races in as well. So he's going to be also racing, like I said, Phoenix and Homestead last 2 races, as well as the Coke 0400 at Daytona. So he's going to be doing a restricted, I would say restricted play race because we're doing a restricted play, a Super Speedway race as well.
Super Speedways. I do the same thing. Yeah.
Very diverse schedule for Tarzo Marquez, but I think it's great to see not only he's going to be getting his opportunity in NASCAR, but it's great for the team, like you mentioned, to come into the sport and also go into a diverse of tracks.
Well, and you mentioned diversity. Why not mention that you're bringing in a driver like Tarso? Like, that's pretty cool. He's Brazilian from Sao Paulo.
He's Brazilian. We got a Mexican and a Brazilian now.
How many IndyCar drivers do you hear of from Sao Paulo? I mean, like, you hear of like TK, you hear of Elio, all these drivers over the course of time in IndyCar that have, come from Brazil, Sao Paulo area. Well, now you've got one in NASCAR. That's pretty cool. You got Daniel Suarez from Mexico. You got Tarso Marquez from Brazil. You had Villeneuve, who's Canadian, but has raced everywhere, all over the world. So, that adds a diversity factor. You've had Marcus Ambrose, within the last 10 years race in the Cup Series from Australia. And you have the potential that Scott McLaughlin eventually makes his way into NASCAR, and he's a Kiwi. So that's actually really cool. You think of the potential that NASCAR has from a diversity standpoint. There's certainly interest. They've got to find a way to bring all these people because, like, people, there's always this thing that NASCAR brings all the best drivers from all over the world. Why I disagree with that, I would say they bring probably the best or some of the best from the United States.
Yeah.
It's hard to argue from all over the world because it's just one country primarily. However, you could definitely make that argument if you had drivers from literally all over the world come to race with you. And we're starting to see that as a possibility. And
Absolutely.
When you have a program like Drive for Diversity, NASCAR Next, there's that possibility. So I really hope NASCAR jumps on that opportunity here in the next couple of years.
You definitely could see them doing it, and especially too, it's a great area to target the Brazilian area because you realize just recently, I want to say a couple weeks ago, Brazil had their NASCAR. I want to say that wasn't a NASCAR series, but they had that stock car race. It was they're racing stock cars at Interlagos. And you had a bunch of guys like Kiko Porto was there. Felipe Albuquerque was racing there. A lot of well-named guys were racing these little stock cars over in Brazil, in Interlagos. So I think you're starting to see a little bit of that cultural change where we're starting to bring a lot more foreigners or international people over into the States to start dipping their toes into stock cars. So I think for sure the road course side, you're going to get a lot of interest from. Now, if we can bring them over to the oval side, which I think you're starting to see a little bit too, start to diverse the schedule, diverse the drivers, diverse the area, you're going to have a diverse series, I would say myself.
I also feel really dumb. I referenced NASCAR Next. While you do have diversity in NASCAR Next sometimes, that is not their diversity. Drive for Diversity is their diversity program.
Correct, yes.
I don't know why
NASCAR Next is like the young drivers coming up into the next generation of drivers.
Which they've had guys like Suarez and Kyle Larson a part of.
Bubba Wallace was a part of it too.
Exactly. So, there was still some diversity. Also like Haley Deegan. But it's not Drive for Diversity is literally their diversity program. So
absolutely.
Better clarify that one. So, we cover Team Strange Racing coming into the Cup Series in Wings and Things. Let's move on to Send It or Pull the Reins. So, first off, Lewis Hamilton says he does not expect Mercedes to compete for wins in their current form. Send it or pull the reins, Jordan.
This is interesting. Obviously, F1 just got done with testing. A lot of quotes were being thrown around. A lot of reporters were out there. Obviously, this was the first test that could actually be media coverage and live for people to see and the public to see. But for Lewis Hamilton to come straight out of the gates after 2 days of testing, I mean, granted, you had your Barcelona test, but 2 days of testing out of Bahrain to say the way the car is right now is not competitive enough to go compete for race wins is pretty bold of Lewis, I would say. I'm going to say pull the reins on this only because you have two drivers in Lewis Hamilton and George Russell who are driving the cars. Two are probably at least one of the greatest drivers in F1 right now in Lewis Hamilton, and a young up
Easily,
and coming
yeah.
star as George Russell, who has proven just jumping in a Mercedes car can win a race. So
Yeah.
I do want to say it's a pull the reins on this one, but I feel like they are going to be. It's going to come a lot. It's going to be a lot more difficult this year to get race wins than it has been in years past. Obviously, Red Bull has grown up a lot and has been now able to challenge for championships. They've shown this pace. Ferrari's now coming up, made a huge gain over the offseason. McLaren's kind of made a huge gain there. So I think you're going to start to see, instead of 2 teams battling for race wins, you're going to start to see 4 teams now, which would be 8 cars battling for wins. But looking at testing, I'd say Hamilton and Russell were 4th and 5th in practices. And I guarantee you they were not having the engines tuned up all the way. I guarantee you there was a little bit of sandbagging in there along the way. So I want to say pull the reins on this one. I feel like we're jumping the gun a little bit too early. We got to wait till we get to the first official practice or get through Bahrain to really find out the true answer on that one.
So here's a thought that I have, and I'm gonna say, pull the reins on Mercedes being a trash team this year. Look, everybody sandbags in testing. Everybody sandbags in testing.
Sure.
Haas went P1. You can't tell me that Haas went from being the worst team on the grid, that they're now the best team. That just further proves the point that everybody sandbags in testing. That's how it goes. You see this with every series. I mean, even like IndyCar with Honda versus Chevy. There are definitely years where it's like, oh, you can tell Chevy doesn't look good in testing, and then they come out and they freaking stomp everybody in the 500, or vice versa with Honda. This has happened in the past, so this is not new. This is not like some sort of conspiracy theory. So it's not absurd to think that Mercedes is just sandbag. I believe there was one session that Hamilton was the slowest. I don't think that it was truly on merit. However, I do think there is something to be concerned about if your 7-time world champion driver, easy for me to say, is saying that you have some things to do in order to be a race winner again. So I think that's worth considering, but all things considered, I really don't feel like they're that far off.
But haven't we seen this before though? From Lewis, especially, like he's gone out and saying even years past that Mercedes isn't capable of winning races, or we're way far off than where we need to be. I mean, you look last year, and hint Drive to Survive just came out, but the first episode they hinted a lot in the preseason testing, and looking back on it, Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton were complaining a ton about how bad the car was handling. Hamilton even spun numerous times, got it stuck in the gravel, and they go out, win the first race, and be title contenders the whole entire season.
Yeah, I mean, and I look at that as, from a development standpoint, that there's certain things to be said, but you got the best drivers, the most resources, the best team. You're probably going to figure out those nuances a lot quicker than when any other team would. And again, to reiterate, they certainly have the resources. So if that's even a question, like if that's a legit concern, if there's any team that could take care of it, it would be them. So I personally think they're going to be okay. Now, to say that they're going to win the world title or the constructors title, I think that's maybe a stretch. And I guess this might be a good segue into our, because I already kind of mentioned it, Send It or Pull the Reins. Part 2, Magnussen goes P1 in day 2 of testing. Mick goes P2 in day 3. Will they be competitive? We're talking about, parity, this new car. We're talking about certain teams struggling that didn't struggle before. We got a new car thrown in the mix. You've got not only is the rule set a lot more level for everybody, but now you've got a new car, and again, everybody starts from scratch. So Send It or Pull the Reins. Do we think Haas is going to be a contender this year?
I think Haas has definitely made an upgrade in its driver compartment. See,
Yeah.
as now they got Kevin Magnussen to come back, which
Yeah.
was completely a shock. I mean, he came out of dear God left field and just popped up on the scene and just goes P1 his first day in the car.
We did not like when we were talking about who could take the seat. We literally did not talk about Kevin Magnussen. I don't think anybody
Yeah.
talked about Kevin. We were talking
No,
about it'd be cool to see Pietro get it, or we could see maybe it goes to
Nico
another
Hulkenberg.
veteran, or Hulkenberg or Giovinazzi, somebody like that. Nobody predicted it would be K Mag, which is cool because Kevin Magnussen is a very capable driver. It's
Mm-hmm.
been proven by pretty much anything else that he's ever hopped in. So his lack of pace in F1 has just been the car, clearly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's cool that he's back. And in terms of Haas being a contender, I'm going to say pull the reins myself. However, while I'm saying they're not going to be contenders for wins or even podiums, I'm going to say they're a much better race team. Like we're
Yeah.
talking down the road, the next couple years, I feel like they could legitimately be a
Mm-hmm.
contender if they continue to progress like they have. I would say they will be in the points this year at some point.
Yep.
I'm not saying, leaps and bounds are going to go from being the worst team, with both drivers not scoring points to being, in the points with both drivers every race. I think they will score points though. Certainly.
I'm gonna say send it in this one.
Really?
I am getting 2016 vibes when Haas first came on the scenes in F1 and when they were
Yeah.
fifth and sixth qualifying and they were like right there battling for podiums when they first came out of the gates. It's a new team. I would say it's a new team. We got a new facelift. It's a clean slate, new car, and everything. I think, Haas has kind of put in the money. They got the work. They obviously didn't put anything towards their 2021 car last year, and they saved it all for this 2022 car. I think they took a gamble, and I think it might pay off this year. So
That's a good point. Yeah. Knowing that the new car was coming.
And Kevin, obviously, being a good driver he is, he can coach Mick. He's definitely going to be a person to mentor Mick all the way through the ranks. So I think Mick himself is going to learn a lot this year. And with years to come, this is going to be a stepping stone year. But I think next year and the year after that, you're going to see them battling for podiums and maybe even fourth in the drivers' champion in the team's championship. But I think for
Sorry, go ahead.
them this year, they're going to be competing for fifth and sixth. I'm going to say one bold prediction: they're going to get one podium this year. Haas is going to get one podium this year.
Considering some of the weird stuff that happened last year, that's not too far fetched. George Russell.
Williams got a podium.
Yeah. I have two final thoughts on this. So I like that you point out Mick Schumacher. So we know that Kevin Magnussen is very capable. I don't think anybody would be surprised if at some point he's a podium and even race winner. I don't think that'd be a surprise to anybody. We're talking his new stint at Haas. I don't think anybody would be surprised by that. But we're talking about Mick Schumacher here, okay? The potential of this guy, being the son of Michael and also being an F2 champion and the expectations that are on this guy. His ceiling has to be so high, but it is like people don't think about this as it is heavily dependent on the environment that is around you.
Yeah.
So I feel like his success is going to be very reflective of that also. Clearly Mick's a capable driver. Mm-hmm. He was in a good ride for F2, so it wasn't really a surprise that he won that. So I think it would be really telling if the car is good, watch out because they'll probably both be up front.
The one thing that stands out to me is Mick was able to post the second fastest lap in day 3, and it was only a half second behind Max Verstappen, who posted the fastest lap of the entire test. And Mick was only a half second behind the second fastest driver. That to me proves that Mick, I think, in his sophomore year, is understanding this car, and I think he's ready to race in F1. And I think you're going to start to see the Mick Schumacher that we kind of saw when he was with Pramac in F2. So I think you're going to start to see the kid start to evolve to be kind of like his dad.
Yeah, I mean, think about this. When Michael first came into F1, he didn't light the world on fire. I mean, everybody knew he was...
He crashed.
yeah, everybody knew he was probably going to be pretty good, but you just didn't know. You know, there are a lot of guys that come in with a lot of potential to any series. I mean, you could say this about any drive. Like, think of like on the NASCAR standpoint. Everybody thought that Casey Atwood was going to be the next Jeff Gordon, and he wasn't. A lot of potential, but a lot of it unharnessed and crashed a lot, and eventually, like, was completely out of NASCAR before he was even in it for 10 years. Like, he was out of it by like 05, 07. Like, he was completely out of NASCAR by that point. And he was expected to be the next Jeff Gordon. I mean, he
Mhm.
never even won a cup race. So, yeah, there's expectations and then there's reality. Now, I think reality, Mick Schumacher has a very bright future in F1.
Absolutely
So,
does.
part 3, send it or pull the reins. This is interesting. Christian Horner says Mercedes has gone too far, and that does not correspond to the spirit of regulations.
So
Um,
this is referring to the side pod stuff that Mercedes came out with, the so-called new side pod, which actually is no side pod at all. But then again, Christian Horner came back on the media and said that it did meet all the regulations and that it was considered a legal side pod. So either somebody in the media got this all wrong and released information on this, which really wasn't truthful information, but then came back and Christian Horner said that they actually meet all the regulations and the car actually meets the standards of the sport, but comes back and said the spirit it doesn't meet the spirit of the regulations because it technically meets the checks all the boxes, but it's not a proper piece of equipment that was considered to be a side pod. So in this whole thing, it's kind of weird. It's a very gray area, but that's the point of F1 with all of these manufacturers and constructing different parts for these cars. So in this case, go ahead, Zach. I know you want to say something.
Sorry, I have several thoughts, and I'm looking at this because like I kind of saw it on Twitter myself, and I was like, okay, I didn't think much of it. I didn't realize it's this much of a fiasco. I'm looking at this, and it's like, yeah, it's not. It certainly looks different,
Yeah,
but who cares, man? Like
exactly.
you would think that having less of a side pod would direct more air directly to the rear tires, which would create more turbulence or would, more drag even. Um, that it would be more aero deficient, right?
Yeah,
You would
it actually
think.
make them slower. You would think it'd make them slower.
Exactly. So when I see this, and not to mention, okay, let's point out, looking at this side pod or no side pod, you got the floor, right? The floor between the
Yeah.
front and rear tires. Um, to me, I would think if you have less of a side pod, the potential of your floor to be damaged is greater, right? Because there's
Yeah.
less protecting it. Which again, the floor is very aero dependent. It's a very crucial aero piece, I think. And maybe some engineers could confirm that. But yeah, I don't see it. Look, people are gonna dunk on Mercedes because Mercedes has been
Is
on top.
Mercedes.
Right. It's no different than when Jimmy Johnson was crushing everybody in NASCAR and they had it all figured out and they won 7 championships. Everybody hated Jimmy Johnson. Everybody loves Jimmy Johnson now because he's not winning
Yeah,
all the
right.
time.
And
It's the same thing with Truex and Kyle Busch and Kevin Harvick when they had that season where they won half the races or whatever in 2018. You're going to see that whenever the New England Patriots when they were on top all those years. People love Tom Brady now that he's in Tampa Bay. It's just one of those things with sports, with entertainment. People hate the guys that are successful all the time because they wish
mhm.
that their guys were as successful as them. So that's what I look at it as. People are digging for nuggets. I don't look at it as more than anything of a potential innovation, and honestly, just Mercedes is developing their car their way, and as long as it's within the rules, I don't really care.
Well, it's kind of like the DOS system that they came out with a couple years ago at the
Yeah,
Catalunya in Barcelona when they were
yeah,
changing the front toe of the car by pulling in and pushing up the steering wheel. It's just
that was
another
genius.
regulation. it was absolutely genius. But
Yeah,
teams protested against it. Didn't want it because they didn't have it on their cars. So when you're looking at this, they're generally not doing anything wrong by the side
for
pod. It's
sure.
just a unique, and they're thinking outside the box compared to every other team. Every other team is being very generic, being very normal, staying within the rules, the box that you're given, but trying to innovate as much as you can. Mercedes is up a level because they are, one, they're fantastic and they're good, but two, they have the leg up on everybody that they can actually look outside the box at different things to try to make their cars faster because they know they're a lot further ahead than everybody else. So when
For
you
sure.
have the innovation, the creative minds, and the ingenuity that Mercedes has and is willing to do, you're going to see stuff like this. That's why they're the first ones to come out with DOS. That's why they're coming out with no side pod. No other team is thinking of coming up with these things. They're thinking about how to improve their floor, how to improve their wing, how to improve the aero. Whereas Mercedes is thinking about how to improve everything else going on with the car, but also engineering some other things to help two places rather than just one.
Right, and you hit the nail on the head. Yeah, it's F1. This isn't IndyCar where it's spec
No.
cars, which I like each series for its own unique ways. But to an extent, I question with this new car. Are these teams being careful? Because when you look at, like, for example, NASCAR is being very specific that these are the rules and you will be
Yeah.
punished greatly if you alter the cars in this way. I almost get the sense that F1 is similar in that, with their rule set being a little bit tighter. So to me, that maybe that's why the teams are not being as aggressive with trying to push the rules. But at the same time, this is F1, man.
Yeah.
Look at how many wacky innovations we've seen in the past. Like whether it's dual axles or insane tunnels or just wacky looking wings. You could go on and on and on about different innovations. Some of them that worked, some of them that were freaking genius.
Mm-hmm.
It's just part of it, and I like that it encourages the best machines on top of the best teams, the best drivers, the best engineers, the best mechanics in the world. So to me, that's part of F1, and I think come Sunday we're going to get a true answer. But I think, regardless, I think we're in for a very exciting season. I think maybe even more exciting than last year.
That's going to be tough to cap off last year's season.
Drive to Survive is going to be interesting this year, folks.
I'm only on episode 3, so I'm still yet to watch everything.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so we'll go on to our last send in and pull the rates topic, and this one kind of came in a little late. I just kind of thought of it on the fly,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
it's Marcus Ericsson's quote where he says, "A month ago, Kevin Magnussen tested an IndyCar at Sebring and was the slowest. Now his first day back in an F1 car, and he's the fastest. It must mean that IndyCar is a lot harder to drive and a lot more competitive than F1. Clearly settles the discussion for once and for all." Marcus Ericsson bashing on the series that he was used to race in, and just basically drops the nail in the coffin right there.
Okay, who did Magnussen test for at Sebring? Was it
Magnussen
Carpenter?
tested. No, it wasn't Carpenter. I think it was Ganassi. You remember he tested Pelot's car
Yes. Okay.
because he raced for Ganassi and IMSA, so he was in top tier equipment. He was in the defending champions car.
Yeah, I'm still going to say pull the reins. I think that's a really dumb take because I get what he's trying to say and hype up IndyCar because he's in IndyCar now.
Yeah.
However, there are so many factors that we don't even know about and we will never know about that go into the top levels of motorsports. And you're trying to compare, Marcus Ericsson is trying to compare IndyCar and F1. And I mean, we're talking about tests.
Yeah.
Let's get to the race and see how it goes.
I will say,
we're talking about a test session. It doesn't mean anything. And he's ran the IndyCar how many times? I think that was his second time driving an IndyCar.
Yeah, it was no wait. It was
he raced Road America.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right.
He raced Road America.
Yeah, that was his second time in IndyCar.
I think that was his second. you're asking a guy like that's like asking Grosjean to come out and be fast out of the box. He wasn't fast out of the box. He was
No.
okay. He's
Yeah.
fine. He's just you're asking somebody to do things with a car that they can't do the first or second time out.
And
So I
especially
don't I don't buy into that honestly.
and especially at a track like Sebring too, out of all places.
Yeah,
You're
very
basically
demanding.
you're asking for basically a street course you're testing at.
It's a very the circuit that they run for testing is the club circuit or
Yep.
whatever it's called. You're running under a minute lap times. That's a very fast, uh, physical, aggressive track. So it's not like a true flowy road course that you'd expect. Certainly not something that he would probably be expected to, or expect used to. Um, so I don't really buy into that. I just look at that as he got to test a Ganassi car. He wasn't as fast, but I mean, looking at the test times from that, like they were all pretty close. So it's not like he was just way far off. He was just down in the timesheets, really,
Exactly.
in terms of position. But yeah, I mean, if that's a dig at Kevin Magnussen, I think that's pretty sad. But
Well, even I saw a video from Roman Grosjean. He posted on his YouTube channel, congratulating Kevin Magnussen for getting the Haas ride again. And he mentioned that there were a bunch of fans. There was an outrage of fans asking Roman if he wanted to go back to F1 because Kevin got another opportunity to race there. Maybe Roman had wanted to go back to F1 and get the proper send off that he wanted to. But he even said that he was much happier being an IndyCar. He doesn't want to. He has no desire or wants to go back to F1. He loves IndyCar. He's much happier where he is. And granted, I think him being in the Andretti stable has a lot to say with it as well. But I think he knows that he's able to compete for race wins week in and week out at IndyCar. Then F1, you may get a race win, once in a lifetime. So I think yes, I think Marcus Ericsson's right in the mindset that IndyCar is a lot more competitive because there's a lot more chances for a race winner to happen. But I also think it kind of shows this quote that Marcus Ericsson's mentioning is the difficulty between the two cars. One has power steering, the other one doesn't. It's the Indy car is a lot more physically demanding, but the F1 car demands a lot of concentration and focus and precision, whereas the Indy car is a little bit more forgiving in that aspect. So I think you can make the argument that one's harder than the other, but I think both series and professional sports even out the balanced playing field in different areas that require concentration, focus, physical, mental strength.
for sure, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you on all that, and I would even further say that you're trying to compare two different forms of racing. Yeah, they're single seaters. Yeah, they're open wheel cars. Yes, they do race on road courses, but I mean, IndyCar races on road, street. I mean,
And
so does
ovals.
and ovals. Yeah, I mean, F1 has a few street circuits, but they're not the same. Well, we're talking
No.
like F1 street circuits and IndyCar street circuits are very different,
Oh,
very
yeah.
different. And that's okay. They're both their own thing. They're fine, but the style of racing, the style of tracks, they're completely different. Really, it's not. They're not similar in any means. And I'm trying to think. Aside from Coda, where has IndyCar and F1 raced at that they've raced at the same track? I
Indianapolis.
exactly, and they didn't even race the same layout.
Yeah.
So there's really no direct comparison between the two series. They're just completely different. So I don't buy into any of that honestly. But
Did IndyCar never raced up in Montreal, did they? At
Champ
Circuit Joe
Car,
Villeneuve?
Champ Car, yeah, they
Champ Car did.
2002 to 2005 or six, they raced
Yeah.
Champ Car up there, which was
That's the
kind of
only
cool.
comparison. That's the only kind of
Right.
comparison I think you can compare off of.
And you could go even further back, like if you want to go back to the old days where, like for example, the Indy 500 counted as part of the
Yeah.
F1 championship. Of course, we're talking a long time ago. But yeah, I mean, to me, there's no direct comparison between the two.
All right. Well, we're going to kind of go ahead and move into our next topic, and we're kind of start to wrap up the show a little bit. But we're going into the main topics here. So, since me and Zach are the only ones on the show, we are not going to be doing another course of fantasy this week, unfortunately, because not everyone is here. But me and Zach are going to go ahead and make our own predictions on who we think is going to win the races, because we have ourselves our very first full lineup of racing this weekend. That's right. We have IMSA 12 Hour happening at Sebring. F1's racing at Bahrain GP. IndyCar is out on the oval of Texas Motor Speedway. And NASCAR is going to the newly formed Super Speedway of Atlanta. So, let's start off with IMSA 12 Hours of Sebring. What are we expecting as we go over the bumps and undulations of Sebring International Raceway?
When you're sitting there talking there about, all these series we got coming up this weekend, I'm like, man, I got to get my cart ready. Racing season is here, dude. Yeah, it's warm weather is upon us. It's slowly coming around. And I'm like, man, I got to get my stuff together. But in all seriousness, it's the first quadruple header. You got IMSA, F1, IndyCar, NASCAR. That's great. That is awesome. IMSA 12 Hour of Sebring. To make predictions for every class would be difficult, but
Well,
it seems like every endurance race within the last year or so, it seems like it always comes down to the wire in at least a couple classes, especially the overall. I feel like we're going to see a great battle on DPI again. Two I would expect to win, I would say the JDC 5 car or the 31 Action Express. I think those are your probably two main characters for the overall win, unless something happens. I don't, Meyer Shank, they're really not as fast at Sebring. Wayne Taylor's usually respectable in terms of pace. They're usually podium. And then you look at, some other factors. You got the 48 Action Express. I think that car's racing, right? Yeah.
Yep, it
is.
is.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah, they are.
So you've got that car. You've got who else is in the field?
You got both Penske, the Ganassi cars, the 01, the 02.
Ganassi. I think they're going to be the wild cards. Yeah. They're going to be the true test of, okay, how good is this DPI program for Ganassi? That's going to be the first big test for them, I think, because Daytona, two cars, first time two full-time cars at least, but you kind of get Daytona out of the way, you get some of the growing pains out of the way. I think this is going to be a really good test for them.
You mentioned JDC. Obviously, they're coming back as the defending winners of this whole race.
Yep.
I think you touched on a good point with Meyer Shank and Wayne Taylor. Wayne Taylor obviously has been really good. Could be good for podiums, but I highly unfortunately don't see him for a win, because Acura has kind of struggled at
that's
Sebring,
what I was going to say.
And that's kind of mostly a Cadillac track. So when you look at it,
Penske was never good. No, as an Acura team, they were never good there either.
Exactly. So I think you're going to look at JDC being a good one. You did mention Chip Ganassi. I feel like my prediction would probably be the 02 Ganassi car would probably go ahead and win this race, only because I feel like they have a strong driver lineup, and they got and that's the thing too that we're going to talk in Bozo of the Week this week is there's no IndyCar drivers there. It's all straight up sports car IMSA drivers, because all the IndyCar drivers are over in Texas for their race. So this is straight sports car racing, no IndyCar drivers or nothing, unless you have a junior open wheel guy who's going to be there. But in the terms of what the 02 Cadillac team is going to be in with, I think, Renger van der Zande and those guys going to be leading the field, I see them being the odds-on favorite to win this race.
That's a good point. I think you could safely bet on any Cadillac. Let's touch on Bozo of the Week. Why do we have the 12 hour in the IndyCar race clashing? I get it. You gotta pander to TV contracts, but NBC has IMSA and IndyCar.
Yeah.
Why would they why? You could have had one week before that does not make any sense at all. You're literally competing with yourself. That does not make I don't understand that at all.
They are. So I don't know if it was a scheduling conflict based on the sanctioning bodies itself, because the sanctioning bodies obviously don't care about one another. IndyCar
No.
doesn't care about what IMSA is doing, and IMSA doesn't care about
Right.
what IndyCar is doing.
But
It's
if
just
IMSA was smart, they would want those guys there.
you're right, but they
So
also need to, and it's kind of weird because it's a political standpoint as well from the
for
sanctioning
sure.
body. But IMSA was looking at this being the Super Sebring weekend and pairing it up with FIA the WEC Series, which are in town for this weekend as well, because they're doing the IMSA 12-hour on Saturday and the FIA WEC Series is racing on Sunday at Sebring. So, you're kind of comparing. You want to get that Super Sebring weekend in, and it just happens to fall on this weekend. Well, I don't know who came out with which schedule first, but IndyCar, I think, had the schedule out first to where they wanted to come to Texas this early in the season because I think this is normally a little bit earlier in the season that Texas is being ran. I think normally it's around the third or fourth race of the year. This year it's the second.
Actually, usually Texas is usually after the 500. So
Yeah,
last year it was earlier in the year. You're right about that. It was like April.
it was around this
Um,
time.
yeah, it wasn't like it was the third and fourth race of the season, I think, because there was Barber and St. Pete first,
Yeah,
and then Texas was the first race of the year 2020 because of COVID. So that it naturally fell that weekend, right? The first race back was in June.
yep,
So, you skipped Detroit, you skipped Indy. Indy was later in the year. So that's the way it fell. But in traditional scheduling, it was always after Indy. In fact, if we could trace it all the way back to the IRL days, sometimes there were two Texas races a year. You'd have
yeah,
one
you're right.
right after the 500, or I think there were a few years it was right before the 500, but usually it's right after the 500, and then you'd have the other one be the finale, or it would
Yes,
be very
the
late
second
in
to
the year.
last race. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So, kind of bringing it back around, it's cool to see another oval this early in the season. Kind of gives you vibes of the old days of the IRL having ovals earlier in the season. It's not like Indy. Uh,
it's the
it's
first
not
oval we go to.
right. And I mean, like, yeah, you used to go to like Phoenix for a couple years, and but like Indy was the first big speedway you went to. Pocono was always later in the year. Auto Club was always later in the year.
Yep.
Gateway always later in the year. Iowa, even if you want to include short ovals. So it was Indy was either the first oval or it was like the second oval. It was never
Yeah.
like, but to see Texas be this early in the season is cool. I'm just kind of worried about the racing itself, just because. Well, for example, I saw an onboard video of Connor Daly running a lap there, and his straightaway speed and his cornering speed, and of course, this is by himself. You got to consider that. So not in traffic. And I would say he probably had a decent amount of downforce on also, but straightaway to cornering speed was very similar. We're talking within like 10 or 15 miles an hour, like top speed on the
Yeah.
straightaway to like bare minimum speed in the corners. Um, Typically, when you see a car match up with a track like that and you see speeds like that, it either means that if the speed isn't changing that much for straight away to corner, either aero push is going to be huge and you're going to see them get really strung out because they're not lifting as much. So that means they're glued to the track, and it's the front end pushes, and that's how it is. Or in much more extreme cases, it's a pack race. I don't see it being a pack race, though. Texas
No.
has not been a pack race in several years, especially with this kind of aero package that they've ran. So I'm thankful for that, because that would be sketchy. But I'm fearful of the racing, because probably not going to be much passing, if I'm being honest, just because there's not much opportunity to pass on a bull ring like that. They kind of killed the racing when they reconfigured the track, in my opinion. But it's not like we can do anything about that. But
Absolutely. So while we're on the topic of IndyCar at Texas, Zach, who would you be your pick for the Texas IndyCar Oval Race?
well, folks, the trends say you go with Scott Dixon because he's won there like 6 times. However, something to consider, Will Power's been pretty good there. He used to
Yeah.
not be an oval guy. He used to hate ovals. Will Power would be a decent pick. I would say, Colton Herta has been good there before. Rossi's been good there before. Joseph Newgarden's won there before. To
Yep.
pick a true favorite, I mean, you've got a Ward. You know what? I'm gonna go outside the box here. I'm gonna say Alex Palou. Here's
Oh,
why.
really
So
outside the
Alex,
box.
really outside the box. So Alex Palou, but honestly, when you hear me justify this, it may not be outside the box.
Sure.
Alex Palou actually led laps at Texas last year, so he's up front with
He
Dixon.
did.
I believe it was the first race. They had 2 races there last year. I believe it was the first race. And Dixon let him go to save fuel, so Palou was pulling him around the racetrack. But it was those 2 guys, and they were in front. Then you go to Indy, and he was really fast.
He was.
Not just single car. I mean, his car was clearly good, right? But you get to the race, and you would have thought that he was a veteran at Indy, and it was his second 500. And you got to remember, Alex Palou in May of last year, his first 500 was August of the year before.
It's crazy.
So you're talking less than a span of 365 days.
Yeah.
You had your first 500 and you were already back. Now, you could say, hey, it's fresh in his mind. However, there like you hear of these things of what it takes to be successful at Indy, not just to win, but to be up front from what it takes from a driver standpoint. And he just did all the right things. Obviously Honda was strong there last year.
Yeah.
The pit crew kept him up front. He's got great engineers, great strategists, but the driver still has to get the job done.
I think it added a little bit more pressure to Palou because the fans were
Yeah.
actually back at that race as well. So you almost had a full crowd.
Yeah, and it if you look at any race last year when something was on the line, pressure was high, stakes were high, Palou always delivered. All the mishaps that he had last year were either mechanical or somebody taking him out. You rarely saw him make a mistake.
True.
So when it comes to a high stress situation like racing at Texas, high speeds, high Gs, I would bet on a guy like that, a guy that doesn't crack. Probably why people would bet on Scott Dixon for that race. Well, he's won there 6 times, so that's But yeah, to reiterate, my guy's Palou for that race.
I think I'd go back-to-back jacks with Scotty McLaughlin. He finished second there last year behind a Ward.
Yes.
And he was quick and the whole entire race.
He would have been my other pick.
Everybody thought he was pretty quick there. And now that he's got a win under his belt, I feel like he's going to be more confident, obviously, going into a track that he almost won at before. He's the only rookie, obviously, that got an oval race in from last year. And I think you look at the way Texas is, it's going to be tough to pass with the PJ1 that they have on top there. But there are talks about people that they have a softer tire coming in that would be a little bit better to run in the PJ1. But also I think it's going to create a second groove of racing. And I think McLaughlin is going to have a good enough car to where he can run that outside to where he's able to pass some cars. So I think you look at Scotty McLaughlin, he might be a favorite up there towards the end of this race when we look on Sunday.
I mean, as long as the PJ1 isn't a factor, if they're actually able to race in that second groove, great.
Absolutely.
Past years, guys haven't been able to race up there, and honestly, it's been kind of dangerous. We got lucky the last couple of years that guys didn't have any serious crashes. We had that crash on the start, but that was completely unrelated.
Big crash that happened at Texas had to be Newgarden's crash.
2016. Well, there was also 2017. They had a few big crashes, like multiple cars. That crash fest where Power won. Remember, Sato took out Dixon. They had a few big ones.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's always a possibility at a track like that. But definitely was a huge possibility with the pack racing that back then.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on now to the juggernaut of motor racing, and that is F1 is starting off its new season at Bahrain, kicking off the 2022 season. This is probably the most anticipated race besides the championship battle from last year. I think everyone's up in arms about this one. Everyone's excited to see F1 come back. Everyone is just excited to see what the new car is going to produce. And judging by testing, even though everyone's probably sandbagging, we have no idea who could potentially be a winner. We obviously know Red Bull's going to be quick, so obviously Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen were going to be good. Mercedes, we obviously know Hamilton and George Russell obviously are really good, especially the way Mercedes' cars. But Ferrari has kind of stepped up the pace a little bit too. And
Yeah.
I think you're going to see a new person up at the top because I'm going to go with Charles Leclerc to win
Okay.
the Bahrain GP because I feel like
He's
Charles
won
was
before.
close. He was close to win in Bahrain. I think it was his second year in 2019 when he first came to Ferrari. He
Yeah,
would
he
have
didn't
won.
win Bahrain, but he's
No,
won
but
for
Yeah,
Ferrari.
he's won a
before.
race before. Yeah,
Yeah.
correct. But I think you're going to look at Ferrari coming back, and I think they're going to hit the ground running when 2022. So I feel like Ferrari's the top guy and the top team to be, and everyone's kind of has them circled as a target on their back.
I completely agree with you. For one thing, they're due for it. They're certainly due for it after the last 2 years. Yeah, and they've got a good driver lineup. I don't think anybody questions the drivers at that point. Ferrari just really struggled. However, I'm going to go a different route just for the sake of conversation. And I'm going to go ahead and say you got to keep your eye on McLaren this year. They've made steady gains the last few years. They have a good driver lineup with Danny Rick and Lando. So they clearly have the talent there, and they've gradually become better and better every year. I think with a new car, I mean, let's be real. We're due to see a McLaren. My voice is cracked. Damn. We're due to see a McLaren World Championship, just like I'm due to hit puberty anytime soon. But yeah, I mean, do you think back to Lewis winning for McLaren? You think of you even think back to the Marlboro days,
Yep.
If we want to go retro here, or
Senna
even
Prost days,
even late '90s when it was not the Marlboro days, but with Hakkinen.
Yep.
So yeah, you got that lineage there. You got to live up to it, but I think McLaren's due also to have a really good season. So yeah, like you said, Jordan, earlier, I think there's legitimately like 4 teams that could be up there. So like 8 drivers.
It's going to be absolutely crazy to see. And I think, you look at the way the car's set up, the way everything's kind of leading up to Bahrain, it's definitely going to be one of those races to where it's going to keep you on the edge of your seat. You're going to be investing into it 100% from lights out to the checker flag. And it's something that you're just going to have to wake up Sunday morning early to see because you're not going to want to miss it for sure. And something else you're not going to want to miss is the newly configured Super Speedway that NASCAR is going to out in Atlanta Motor Speedway. So this race, by the looks of it and by the sounds of it, is you could basically treat it like another Talladega Daytona and pick a name right out of the hat. So
well, NASCAR already has because they announced that they're going to run reduced horsepower and increased downforce for all 3 series there.
Oh, great.
Great
move.
They've killed the racing. Yeah, I mean, trucks.
Repaved circuit, not to mention either.
Truck race, it was you already kind of knew that was probably going to be, if not a pack race, it was going to be, pretty crazy. Cup race, obviously. But like, I would have been interested to see how the Xfinity cars would have raced. Maybe they would have been too fast for a track like that. And really, I think that's why they went that route. That has to be some sort of concern. Even though Atlanta is smaller than Daytona and Talladega, that is always going to be a factor. Now, something's kind of scary to me. Their cornering speeds are obviously going to be faster, more banking, which leads us to the assumption that they're going to be faster in general. And you're on a much tighter track than Daytona or Talladega. I hate to go this route, but, with a new car that I feel like has checked all the boxes in terms of safety so far, but there's always still that factor, that something crazy could go wrong at any time. It really makes you think, IndyCar used to race on ovals like this all the time. and they got away
Yeah.
from it for a reason. Now they had their own problems. It wasn't just the style of racing or the track. It was kind of the cars were not safe either. But it really begs the question. I mean, is this going to be safe? Is this going to be something that's sustainable every year? This was a big investment for them to reconfigure this track for it to be like this. There's also going to be a double yellow line rule apparently, or at least that's been evaluated. So I would expect that if they're treating this like a true super speedway race, I would think it's going to be like that.
They absolutely are treating this like a true super speedway race. I mean, you look at it. They tested this out years ago with the All-Star race out in Charlotte. Remember when they brought the restrictor plates out there the first time, and that was pretty cool racing, yeah. But it was very sketchy too at some points. So I think at this, especially with tighter configuration, they have to. I feel like to slow the cars down because over the duration of time, I feel like the tires in the front of the car are going to start to wear out, and you might see a lot of guys start to drift up the track just based on the tight radius of the corner it's going to be, because it's a much tighter radius turn than you look at Talladega or Daytona. So looking at this racetrack, I think it's an interesting concept. It's going to be interesting to see how it runs, and especially with new pavement. We don't know what's going to happen. Obviously, we all know it's going to be a pack race, but we all don't know what's going to happen on this. So my prediction to win is Kurt Busch. Outrageous prediction, 15-car pilot, at least. 15 cars or more.
I don't think that's an absurd prediction. I think that you're going to see a lot of them. I honestly, I'm going to go into this weekend with an open mind in terms of the NASCAR race and just try to enjoy it, see what we learn from it. Everybody's going in with, these preconceived notions where it's either going to be really great or really bad. I'm not really one of those. It's just let's go in and see how it does, and if it's awesome, sweet. And if not, well, they messed up. But
exactly.
I think it'll be cool. In general, it's a new track configuration at least, something that NASCAR's never tried before. So there's definitely that excitement to it, and I think it'll be interesting regardless.
It definitely brings another unique track to the calendar. I will say it's
for sure.
So we're gonna have that uniqueness of a track of Atlanta. It's not gone away from its old 1.5 mile stages. Yeah. It's no longer. I don't even know if you could consider it the sister tracks to Charlotte and Texas now. I mean, it's the same type of setup, but it's totally different style. So I don't know. But then again, I guess you could say Texas is the messed up one that kind of looked good, had potential, and then just kind of got diagnosed with something bad. So.
Well, they all looked the same for a while. I mean, they had their own characteristics, right? But they all looked similar. They were all very similar. And Atlanta in its beginning was a lot more not closer, but in terms of shape, at least, was a lot closer to Homestead than it was anything else. It was a true oval. Then they reconfigured it to a quad oval to replicate Charlotte. And they had some great races there. However, I feel like in terms of its identity, it kind of lost a little bit because there's now another track that looks just like it. And then you have Texas also at around the same time period. And then Texas reconfigures. You've got Atlanta that is now reconfigured. Charlotte runs their oval or their roval. So they now no longer have two oval dates. It's interesting how that stuff kind of plays out.
It's crazy. So I'm obviously everyone's just going to go in open mind with all this whole weekend and how it's all structured. I think it's going to be racing. Great, fantastic weekend if you're a race fan. You basically got 4 great series to watch. Yep. IMSA, Indycar, F1, NASCAR. What more can you ask for in this type of weekend? So if you want to know where I'm going to be, I'm definitely going to be sitting in front of a TV watching the races.
For sure. I have one more thing to add on Atlanta that I think is going to be interesting to keep an eye on. If we have green flag pit stops, how that's going to play out. Because if they're in a pack,
that's right. There's no way you're going to have to drop off the track. You're almost going to have to stop or just you're going to have to do IndyCar style.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking that they're going to have to enter from the backstretch, but if you botch the entry, you slide up the track onto the bank and take out everybody. Ooh, that's interesting. I don't know how they're going to do that. That actually might be a fundamental problem.
That might be next week's dumbest things to do on the racetrack.
That might be Bozo of the Week, Atlanta Motor Speedway. Let's put all that to rest.
Let's say
it's a legitimate concern. It's just let's not write it off yet. I'm sure NASCAR probably has a backup plan.
Yeah. If this happens and something does happen, it's not Atlanta's fault.
It's gonna be funny.
It's not It's not Atlanta's fault. Whatever happens this weekend is not Atlanta's fault unless something catastrophically with the track goes bad. Then it's Atlanta's fault. But
if something stupid happens, it's gonna be funny. But I'd rather the race go smoothly. So, but yeah, I mean, it's gonna be interesting. I think it'll be fun.
I didn't think about that. There's gonna be absolutely no time to go from the banking of the track down the pit road, and if you do, I mean, you're gonna have to enter the back.
Because think about this. Even if you signal, like Daytona, Talladega, they drop from the bottom lane down to the apron.
Then they hit the brakes.
And then they hit the right. They don't stop on the bottom lane, otherwise they get ran over. Because not everybody always pits from the bottom lane. Like if you're going to pit, you pit from the bottom lane, but not everybody from the bottom lane pits. If that makes sense?
So the only way I could think about it is if everyone's in the pack, the guys who are pitting are obviously going to be on the bottom, and the guys who aren't are going to have to go in the second lane and just use that as their secondary bottom lane. That's the only way I could see it working. But then you're going to have a lot of guys who could potentially run people over.
That's what I'm saying. I think that's almost where they would have to. Then you think of like the car, like you said, bottoming out, like the transition, bottoming out and damaging the car. Ooh, that's
I'm interested to see how this is going to work.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine, but it'll be fun.
These guys are professionals, still know what to do.
These guys, they get paid to do this stuff.
They're the quote-unquote greatest drivers in the world.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, this has been fun. Another great episode here on Arrive and Drive. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Zach. That's Jordan. And we'll catch you guys next week.
Peace out, guys.